Thank you all for coming. Attendance-wise, we actually do have everyone. Josh and Jennifer are going to be on Zoom, be with us virtually. They're both under the weather. And so, have we got them yet? Yes. Yeah. See Josh. Jennifer. No, that's Daniel. There we go. Josh and Jennifer, can you hear us?
I can. Not sure if you can hear me.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Maybe, maybe not.
Same here. I can hear you. Jennifer, can you hear me? Because I heard you.
Yes, Josh, I can hear you. I don't know that they can hear us, though.
Yeah.
Josh, Jennifer, either one alive?
Uh-oh.
Now we've lost everything.
That's definitely not a good thing.
Yeah, it's ominous. There we go.
Test, test. Test, test.
There we go.
There we go.
There, got life.
Jennifer, try.
Okay.
Jennifer, you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay,
There we go. All right.
We've got everybody. Okay. First, we've got a couple of new members committee, and just to remind us all, just cover a couple of high points of what it's all about. The budget committee is made up of the elected board, 7 elected board members, and an equal number of appointed committee members to have 14 on the budget committee. Majority of the committee members must be present to convene a meeting. Only budget committee business can be transacted during that meeting. And the budget committee reviews the budget, provides feedback to the district leadership, and approves the budget for final adoption by the board of directors. They hear the message, the budget message, receive the budget document, hear from the public, and then the approval process. The governing body, school board, must hold a public hearing on the budget approved by the committee, which will be published in advance. And then the governing body, the board, would adopt the budget and enact resolutions or ordinances by June 30th, certify the district's tax levy to the county assessor by July 15th, if applicable. And so just general idea of what's going on. And then first thing we need to do is elect a chair and a vice chair for the budget committee. And by law, it can be any of the 14 members, but traditionally, we here at Silver Falls have, and this is common with a lot of boards really, they're selected from the appointed members, the officers are. And after the budget elections are finished, then the budget committee chair will preside over the remainder of the budget meetings. So at this time, I'd entertain motions, or I should say a nomination for chair for the budget committee.
I'd like to nominate Dr. Creighton Helms.
Second. Okay, Dr. Creighton Holmes has been nominated. Do I hear any others? Motion to close nominations?
Move to close the nomination, call for the question.
Second.
Been moved and second to close nominations and call for a question. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. And we'll entertain a motion for a unanimous vote for Dr. Creighton Holmes as chair.
Move that the committee take a vote for Dr. Creighton Helms as the chair.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and second, take a vote for Creighton Holmes as chair. And so Debbie, would you take roll on that?
Hillary,
Aye.
Dr. Creighton Helms,
Aye.
Maxwell,
Feels-
Murphy,
Aye.
Jenny Sewell,
Aye.
Brian Starr,
Aye.
Kelly Strong,
Aye.
Paul Thompson,
Aye.
Phil Wiesner,
Aye.
Owen Von Flue,
Aye.
Derek Foxworth,
Aye.
Jennifer Traeger,
If my name's being called, yes. I can't really hear Debbie.
Say.
Sorry, Jennifer.
Aaron Cook,
Yes.
Josh Ort,
Yes.
Tom Buchholz.
Yes.
All in favor.
Okay. And then I'll entertain nominations for vice chair of the budget committee.
I would like to nominate Mr. Starr.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and second to nominate Ryan Starr for vice chair. All those in favor, aye.
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 Is there any other nominations? Okay, he's got it. Okay. And Dr. Creighton Holmes, it's your meeting?
Don't we vote? Don't we vote?
Oh, my
We
bad.
voted on
You're-
the nomination.
You are right, yeah, you are right. My bad, I glossed over that. We'll have a vote on Brian Starr for vice chair. And again, Debbie is the roll on that.
Hillary, Lukascu,
Aye.
Creighton Helms,
Aye.
Max Murphy,
Aye.
Jenny Sewell,
Aye.
Brian Starr,
Aye.
Kelly Strong,
Aye.
Paul Thompson,
Aye.
Phil Wiesner,
Aye.
Owen Von Flue,
Aye.
Derek Foxworth,
Aye.
Jennifer Traeger,
Yes.
Josh Ort,
Aye.
Aaron Cook,
Aye.
Tom Buchholz.
Aye.
All in favor.
Okay. This is the public comment piece for when it's necessary.
Perfect.
And, does everybody have the agenda? It's superintendent will be the budget message now. Do we have a copy of the agenda for Dr. Holmes?
Okay, good evening. Dear Silver Falls School District families, staff, school board members, and budget committee. We come together this evening to present the proposed budget for the 25-26 fiscal year. This past year has tested us in many ways, particularly as we face difficult staffing reductions of nearly 20%. Cuts of this scale deeply impact our schools, yet I want to acknowledge the unwavering commitment, resilience, and professionalism of our staff who have remained focused on serving students despite formidable challenges. A sound school budget must be closely aligned with our district's strategic goals to ensure that every dollar supports student achievement and well-being. Our current strategic plan, which has guided our priorities in recent years, includes the following goals. Each student is on track to graduate every year. Each student has the social and emotional learning skills to navigate their world, and our facilities reflect our love and respect for our students. As the lifespan of our strategic plan concludes, and given the instability we've recently experienced, I recommend initiating a strategic planning refresh. The budget includes a $25,000 allocation to support a collaborative process with the Willamette Education Service District to revisit and renew our strategic plans and vision. This work is vital to shaping a more focused, student-centered path forward for our district. On the state level, the legislature has proposed an unprecedented $11.39 billion investment in public education for the 25-27 biennium. While this figure represents a significant increase, our budget is built conservatively based on the currently proposed amount. Given the governor's ambitious initial proposal, we expect limited movement upward before final approval by the legislature in June. At the same time, rising costs, especially related to PERS, and I know you guys have heard Kim and I talk about PERS about 1,000 times probably, continue to strain school district budgets across Oregon. While Senate Bill 849 passed on May 6th, helped offset our PERS obligations slightly by 1.68%, we are still contending with nearly an 8% increase. In response, this budget establishes a PERS reserve fund to mitigate future volatility and promote long-term financial sustainability. Our projected ending fund balance is $3.096 million, which is higher than last year's, but still well below the 10% reserve threshold required by district policy. The state's recommended reserve level is a minimum of 8%, and I encourage the board to consider amending our policy accordingly to provide more flexibility in the current fiscal climate. As we built this budget, we considered a range of uncertainties and factors, including federal education funding. The federal government has signaled a possible shift in its education funding structure. We have revised our grant revenue projections accordingly, with no anticipated increases to Title I or IDEA, and have removed Title III funding. We remain confident that Title I and IDEA will continue due to their congressional authorization. Staffing levels and enrollment. While there is significant interest in restoring staffing to previous levels, it is not financially viable in the face of ongoing enrollment decline. As presented in Jackie Olson's analysis in the spring, past staffing increases outpaced enrollment, contributing significantly to our current budget challenges. Right-sizing staff to match enrollment is essential to maintaining fiscal responsibility. Enrollment-linked grant reductions. So this year, the district has lost 91 students to date, which impacts not only our general state funding, but also our key grants such as the Student Investment Account, Early Literacy, and High School Success. With over 34 FTEs funded through these programs, rising personnel costs have outpaced the funding, requiring reductions in other budget areas to avoid further staffing cuts. Food services deficit. Our nutrition services program continues to operate at an annual loss of $300,000 to $400,000, a trend dating back to 2015. So that's been happening for quite some time in the district. While the community eligibility program has helped increase meal access, it hasn't eliminated the deficit. We are transitioning to an in-house food services and have hired a director of student wellness and achievement who will lead changes to improve fiscal sustainability and program quality. Interfund transfer payoff. We dedicated over $1 million to clear past debt in the 24-25. Actually, that's an updated figure. Isn't it 679 now? With it?
The proposed budget will be
Yeah, it's
well over $1 million
It
altogether.
will be
Yeah.
also,
Yeah.
okay. In food service, Medicaid, and facility rentals that were left unpaid and rolled forward for many years. This reset is essential to fiscal recovery and will enable us to better manage our liabilities. Facilities planning. Many of our school buildings are over 60 years old. Maintaining safe, accessible, and welcoming facilities is essential to student success. This budget dedicates $500,000 to establish a capital reserve fund, laying the foundation for future upgrades and roof replacements. Recent facility assessments by the Oregon Department of Education will help us prioritize repairs and inform future bond planning. Targeted staffing adjustments. We made modest staffing increases in critical areas such as student safety and reading intervention, made possible through attrition and other adjustments elsewhere. I'm pleased that we were able to fund 2 reading intervention positions previously funded by generous donors in the past budget year. Long-term fiscal planning. Years of deficit spending and insufficient reserves cannot be corrected in a single budget cycle. We are developing a 3-year budget forecast and have commissioned a population study to better project future enrollment. These tools will support data-driven decisions about staffing, programming, and facilities. Budgeting for a school district is never easy, particularly in times of uncertainty. I want to sincerely thank our leadership team and staff who work diligently and thoughtfully to create a budget that prioritizes students, maintains essential programs, and builds towards long-term financial health. We have learned valuable lessons from this process and are committed to moving forward together with clarity and purpose. Challenges remain, but I believe deeply in the creativity, determination, and collaboration of our educators, families, and community members. With your continued support, we will ensure that Silver Falls remains a district where every student is known, supported, and inspired to thrive. Thank you for your ongoing dedication to our schools and students. Any questions about all of that? Thank you.
Okay, well, I certainly feel as honored as I am unprepared. Is there a script that I'm supposed to follow, or are we just kind of, because I don't have that in front of
The
me.
agenda.
The agenda.
Oh, just the agenda, okay. So next up on the agenda then would be the presentation of the 2025-2026 proposed budget.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Helms.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Budget Committee members and Silver Falls School Board. We are very pleased tonight to be presenting the 2025-26 proposed budget to you. Just delivered to you was our budget message from our superintendent, which really highlights the goals and the approach that we took to developing this proposed budget for you tonight. Now that the budget message has been delivered, we are going to move on to explaining a little bit about our budget development and our process. We're going to share some demographics with you that are going to be critical to the evaluation of the budget in front of you. Also sharing some budget and assumptions, some of the real data that goes into the very involved document that you have in front of you, and try to provide that in a format that is a little more tangible for you. We'll talk about the roles of the Budget Committee and the board here tonight, as well as your next steps, and conclude after that. So wanted to start tonight by walking through the process that is involved in developing the proposed budget that is in front of you tonight. It all really starts with the vision for the district, and the budget development must keep this vision at the forefront, and that is to align this budget with the strategic goals, as your budget message just mentioned. And those goals for graduation on time for all students, as many as we can, social and emotional skill development, as well as ensuring that our facilities are safe and welcoming for all of our students. Our vision is to align our resources with the school board's priority to build reserves and increase the long-term financial stability for this district. We believe what we're going to present here to you tonight is in line with that vision. The process that was involved was, of course, identifying our priorities to ensure that our resources are aligned with the areas of greatest need throughout the district. We evaluate our instructional programs and identify any areas that may have been disproportionately impacted by the significant reductions that were felt just a year ago and are continued to be felt in our schools. And of course, that process involves developing this plan focused on growing those reserves as our vision guides. Each year, the budget is driven by countless variables, but there are truly some key budget factors that drive this budget. For this year, we've identified our rising costs, our limited revenue, and our declining enrollment as the key factors. Our rising costs are similar to what many of us see in our own homes, with inflation impacting the price of goods and services. We see that with every grocery store run. We see that with our utility bills. We also see rising costs in relation to our PERS rates. And again, as our budget message emphasized, we realize you've heard that, but when we are seeing an additional 8 cents on the dollar of every wage, of every dollar paid in wages, that was a significant factor in this budget process. And rising costs related to student needs. The student needs are growing. There is no doubt about that. So the needs of our students are increasing. In terms of our revenue, our state dollars truly fall short of the true cost of operating our schools. We see that with the inability to truly take care of our buildings and our facilities, and truly just doing everything we can to operate the instructional needs and serve our students every day. Additionally, special revenue levels have decreased. That's in the form of possibly grants or other specialized funding, and many of those funding streams remain uncertain today. And then unfortunately, declining enrollment is a major factor in the budget. Our funding is directly tied to our enrollment. And while we have fewer students, many of our costs have not decreased. We still have as many acres to mow. We still have as many roofs to replace. We still have as many buildings to clean. So there are certain variables that do not proportionately decrease as our student enrollment does. With that, we wanted to share with you tonight some demographics and historical data that is going to be key in tonight's presentation. With enrollment being that primary factor driving our resources, our enrollment trends are key to preparing a balanced budget for now, as well as preparing for the future years. This chart shows you across the bottom our current enrollment, and we have a senior class of 310 students, yet a kindergarten class of 231. This chart demonstrates an overall trend of decreasing enrollments in our younger grades. Our administrators have shared their projections for kindergarten for the 2025-26 year, and that is reflected in the upper chart. And while it's currently projecting a slight increase over current year, this still represents a potential loss of nearly 70 students for the next school year. As Superintendent Kellison mentioned, we have contracted with Flow Analytics to complete a 10-year enrollment study. That is going to provide critical data to build a multi-year plan for our budgets, our facilities, and our staffing. Additional instructional programs are also being explored, including the hybrid program shared at last night's board meeting, and in an attempt to identify opportunities to support more students and families who may have alternative educational needs. The unique configuration of Silver Falls with our large number of schools is what makes us special and also lends some unique challenges. For example, if we were to see an increase of 25 students at the kindergarten level, it would be reasonable to think we should add another teacher. But with so many schools and that increase being dispersed the way it is, determining how and where to add a staff member is extremely challenging. This chart shows enrollment by school year across a 15-year span, and definitely shows a lot of movement. As you can see, there's great fluctuation with Silver Falls having reached a high of 3,940 students before our COVID losses took away 400 of those. Today, we remain approximately 400 students below that peak enrollment, a loss of 10%, and with those students, the associated revenues have also been decreased. Again, our enrollment study will provide the insight we need to develop a proper plan for a solid future for Silver Falls. While we're seeing the enrollment decreases, we are actually seeing pretty significant increases in the needs of some of our most vulnerable students. And unfortunately, with those increased needs become increased costs. Finding a way to ensure that our students are receiving the special services that they need is critical, and we are committed to ensuring that we are serving all students. This just continues to represent that despite that declining enrollment, we actually are seeing an increased disproportionate percentage of those students needing additional services. So when we look at our enrollment, represented by the blue bars, as compared to our staffing, as represented by the orange line, particularly through the 23-24 school year, we do see that our staffing adjustments after the COVID pandemic did not align with our enrollment changes. Admittedly, our reduction in the 24-25 school year was drastic and is absolutely felt in every program and every department. Yet with our 2025-26 enrollment projected to be nearly identical to the 2011-2012 school year, we are closer, yet still at a higher staffing level than we were at that time. There is no question that our student needs have increased and that our staff are essential to meeting those needs. Yet with our funding tied, again, directly to that enrollment, staffing adjustments must remain at the forefront as our enrollment changes continue. Kim's message to right-size staffing is exactly where we need to make sure that that remains an absolute focus each and every year as our student counts change. So we want to share the story of our general fund ending fund balance. This is showing you in millions for the same range as the enrollment chart on the prior year, where our ending fund balance has been year over year. After COVID, federal ESSER funding was a significant source of revenues, and it boosted our ending fund balances at that time, yet they still were clearly not sufficient. In 2024, June 30, 2024, the chart actually appears to show a healthy increase in our ending fund balance, but it's important to note that that $1.6 million shown for June 30, 2024 includes a $3.8 million deposit from our tax anticipation note funds. Without that tax anticipation note, the dotted line down below, and I apologize if that's a little difficult to see up there, but that dotted line down below would have been our ending fund balance. We would have had a $2.1 million negative ending fund balance. Taking this into account and the fact that Silver Falls paid back the entire $3.9 million tax anticipation note in December of 2024, we are absolutely pleased to share a projection of an ending fund balance on June 30, 2025 of $2.1 million. This ending fund balance becomes the beginning fund balance that is represented in this budget document that you are receiving tonight. As I was preparing these charts, I couldn't help but realize the direct relationship between our enrollment and our ending fund balances. This was beyond obvious that our enrollment drives our funding. And I needed to show this to you side by side, and I realize it's very small, but what we are seeing on the top is that ending fund balance is now beginning to climb as our staffing levels have been adjusted to more closely align with our enrollment. before we move on to the next section, are there any questions about some of this data or some of these pieces we've presented in this section?
I think from a historical reference standpoint too, it's also just interesting to point out that from that kind of that when COVID hit in 2020 on, and we see significant drops in our ending fund balance in 2020 and also in 23. I believe we had two licensed association negotiations and one classified negotiation during that time frame too. So you had staffing levels that remained at a higher level with declining enrollment, and also the cost to compensate our staff also was higher at that point too. So it kind of contributed to our fund decline over that roughly 3 to 4 year period. So just a couple of pieces just from a historical standpoint for our members just to consider during that time.
It's very, very, prudent that you point that out, because there are a lot of anomalies that flow into these numbers. We look at the inflow of federal dollars into our districts from both ESSER as well as FEMA was another. We had 2 FEMA projects with revenue claimed in those years that are marked with the federal ESSER dollars, and those funds were definitely pivotal in these ending fund balances. That's definitely a lot of pieces to point out in each of these. So, yes,
Just-
Hillary.
Yeah, I just wanted to, you mentioned twice that students have greater needs. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means?
I can speak to, as part of the leadership team, and some of our curriculum directors here would be more apt to this, but we are seeing greater special services needs, but we're also seeing increased behavioral needs. We're seeing increased speech support needs. Mental health is a huge piece.
Social and emotional learning. Brandon probably could talk more about some of this.
Yeah, I would say it's not just special ed students or students identified for services, but just in the classrooms in general, teachers needing more support with the students they work with. We're seeing kindergartners coming in with, needing more support as well. It's just, I think in all districts across the state, or any teacher you talk to, you're seeing just a different profile of student in the last 5 to 10 years than we've seen historically.
So
And those
that's-
higher needs students, Hillary, are up across the state. So like, in some places, our special needs students are at about 15% of our population, but statewide, they range from 15 to 20% in some districts, so.
And is
even
that
higher.
just raising your need for support staff?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Isn't that also a result of families not being able to afford preschool? Are we finding that in Silverton as well? We had that issue in other places. So.
Yeah, I think preschool is in high demand across the state and in short supply.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
Can I have a follow-up question? And if it's not time, I'll
Yeah.
table it, because I always do that. If I remember the data correctly, we have about 30% or 30 additional students. You had just said 15% of the general population of student is for or needing special services, whether that's with the SPED department or social emotional learning. But we are proposing, or you said in the letter, that we are not seeing in Title I or IDEA increase, and we're removing Title III funding. But that population is increasing where the general ed population is decreasing. Did I understand that correctly?
You're correct, yeah. And those figures come from the federal government. So Title I funding is part of a specialized grant that was created in 1965. And IDEA, same, it's also a categorical grant that comes from the federal government. And we have been told that those will have either flat or a slight decrease. So we actually budgeted for the slight decrease to be safe.
I would like to point out, it's important to note the 15% of student population that we're referring to are truly those students who do qualify as special education students. It is much higher than that when we count in our students in need of additional supports. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification.
Yes.
That's good.
Kim, just a comment. I appreciate the historical look back because it kind of shows where we're at how we got there and where we're headed in the future. And I think, Superintendent, you mentioned it in your opening statement just about the potential board policy on what our reserve actually should be. And I wrote down realistic and prudent. And so kind of wrestling with that as we move forward and look back, that we probably were never truly at that 8 to 10% benchmark going back to 2012.
Even at your peak in 2018, yeah, even at the peak in 2018, the way the board policy is currently written as 10% of total budgeted revenues, we would not have been there. There is a footnote on the board policy that indicates that potentially a consideration of having a policy that references a percentage against general fund revenues. There are a lot of complexities to why that would be prudent for the district. I would be happy to talk maybe offline on that because your total revenue in your budget can be a bit misleading due to how some inter-fund services work. And be happy to talk with the board some more about that or go into that in a finance committee meeting.
And I have reached out to Colleen at OSBA to get the most current policy on that, so that we have the most up-to-date version.
Since that came up, I just want to mention that I remember very clearly when Jackie Olson came to present, she actually recommended potentially a higher than 10% one too. So there's reasons that kind of cut different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a complex piece because if you have reserves for specific purposes, 10% might be sufficient. If you do not have a capital reserve fund for your buildings or possibly a PERS reserve fund, then yes, you may want to consider. So those are the board directions that they can, our school board can help guide the financial operations.
And Josh online has a question or a comment.
Thank you, Creighton. Hey, Kim, I was just wanted to double check on that 13% to 15% for special education. Did that increase of 2% just directly affects our AMDW, right? And it gives us a higher little bit of ratio for more funding? Is that all it does?
So Josh, currently in Oregon, special education funding, meaning the additional weighting or additional funding for special education students, stops at 11%. So everything above 11% is not receiving any additional funding through the ADMW, which is our weights for our membership. There is current legislation to change that cap. However, we are awaiting information as to whether they are going to just increase the cap and have the same pot of money that might be a little dispersed over more weights, or are they going to increase that cap plus provide some additional funding to not dilute the per ADMW rate that we receive. So
thank you. I was confused because I thought they had bumped it to 13, but you're saying 15% of our population qualifies. Is that what you're saying? But we're only getting funded currently at 11. They didn't bump up the additional 2% to 13?
Not at this time. There are current bills in the works.
Yeah, that's on the floor still, I believe, for discussion.
Yeah, and I would just say in districts around it, it varies. Just speaking obviously from my experience, Jervis is at 18%, 19%, but we're also capped at 11. And so that difference has to be made up somewhere else because those students still need appropriate services and staff supports. And so that becomes a pretty significant variable on the overall budget of how do you still provide FAPE and provide services to those students when you're theoretically capped at what they should be getting from a special education funding perspective. And I don't know if, I believe it's the legislation, it appears to be dead on arrival, the idea of going from 11% to 15%. So I don't believe that any districts are budgeting for an increase in that percentage. So also a really difficult conversation to be had around budgets.
Yeah, there might be more information on that soon after the economic forecast comes out tomorrow.
Yeah.
And Dr. Helms is correct in that this budget presented to you tonight does not assume any increase in our funding because of that uncertainty. We would much rather not count on revenue and have it come through as a positive. So.
Yeah.
Hey, Kim, could you,
Yes.
back to the declining enrollment?
Yes.
How much of that is, you know, we hear lots about people making other educational choices and pulling their kids. And I've kind of assumed that that's where our declining enrollment was from. But looking at the numbers, a lot of it is just lower birth rates. Can you speak to how much of that decline is people pulling their kids, and how much of that is just the kids aren't there?
Yeah.
And,
That
you
is
know,
exactly why we've commissioned an enrollment study, is
Okay.
to determine exactly how much of it is choice. We do know how many of our in-district students are not enrolled in our schools. If they were to all be back, we still would, I believe, barely be at our peak enrollment. So we do know that the family size is decreasing. That is census data information that is available. Yes, people are not having as many children, but there is the opportunity of choice, right? And so this enrollment projection, as much as kind of cringe to spend the money, right? But it is critical, right? Those investments are critical to knowing how to build a budget, what we do with our facilities, how do we staff, and it will be priceless. This will be a 10-year projection. The last projection they did is right on with where we are right now. We are on the low. They always give kind of a low and a mid and a high projection. We are in the low. Obviously, when they did an enrollment study many years ago, no one had COVID in their projection. So of course, that's a big piece to this. So we're excited to, that'll be done in the coming months.
I have an observation / question. Silver Falls does not offer an online option, correct?
I'll let Superintendent.
Yeah,
tell
we
us.
are going to offer an online hybrid option next year. So when we looked at our enrollment statistics, we did notice that we had a large chunk of kids that were leaving the district for strictly an online program. And sometimes kids need a more flexible schedule. You know, just different options. There's a wide variety of reasons. And when I see those come through, a lot of times I will call and say, hey, you know, is there something I could help you with that would make you know, my student, you know. And so we do check on those. And so we decided that we should probably find some type of option to attract those students to come back to us in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And so Jen Hannon has been putting together a hybrid option that it's a new thing in the state. It's not strictly an online option. So it includes the ability to take online courses, the ability to take an online elective. So if you wanted to take a CTE course, or if you wanted to take psychology, or whatever, AP Psych or whatever it is, live, you could do that. And it also allows students to accumulate credit for life experiences outside of the building. So work study, or, you know, if they've taken a course on ceramics somewhere else, they could come in and do a proficiency-based assessment that shows they're proficient in ceramics, and we could give them credit for that. So just some of those more flexible options where students really have like a personalized education plan. So, you know, if their family needs some support but doesn't feel comfortable with an entire brick and mortar situation, then we're going to try and meet them where they're at and serve them how we can.
Good. I'm glad to see that, because obviously as the numbers increase for special services, I would assume that online option should match. And so then my follow-up question, knowing that we're entertaining that, is then do we retain those funds if we have an online option? So we could potentially get 300 head count back?
Yeah, the more students you enroll, the more ADM you get. So yeah, so those students do equate to extra ADM for the district.
But that would not be in this proposed budget, because we don't have that program.
We do not have it. Yeah, we do not have any revenue currently in this budget for the online program, but we do have staffing dedicated to it at Sequoia Falls. So Sequoia Falls is able and willing to take the first 30 students without any additional additional staffing, excuse me. And so Jen Hannon has that all organized, but if it grows substantially or has a significant enrollment come back to the district, then we would have to address that with some staffing support.
Thank you.
I just want to piggyback off of Jenny's question. Would a kid enrolled in the online receive the same ADM as an in-person student?
Yeah.
Okay.
You are
thanks.
correct.
That's
yes.
correct, yeah, and they have attendance parameters and different things that they are required to do to meet ODE's minutes requirements, and
Okay.
so there are still, even though it's a different type of program than your comprehensive high school or middle school, it does still have some attendance requirements and reporting requirements so that we can track ADMW that way, Tom.
Good, thanks.
Another enrollment question. Years ago, we used to have quite a few Salem Kaiser,
Yes.
Mount Angel kids coming into the district. Is that not happening anymore, or is that still?
We actually have a significant number of transfers.
Yeah.
As of right now, we have 370 from other districts.
Okay. Our
Included
CTE,
in these numbers,
Yeah.
so yes.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
take as many as we can.
yeah, well, I would hope so, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
About 2/3 of those are from Salem Kaiser.
Yeah,
We have more that come in than go out.
yeah.
Yeah, so
That's
it's a
good.
positive gain for
Yeah.
us. Yeah.
Okay.
Josh, another question, comment?
Yeah, sorry, Kim Dowd, are you still going with your presentation? Because I have a question about high-cost disabilities. I figured this might be the time to do it, but if you're going to get to it, I'll wait.
Yeah, it depends. Maybe we can pause that. I may address that when we get into our actual budgeted revenues and expenditures if you'd like, or you're welcome.
I'll wait, I'll wait.
Okay, perfect. We'll table that, and if we don't cover that, that'd be great.
I'll remind you if we don't get to it.
All right. So I'd like to move on to our budget and assumptions. And as we continue through this next portion of the meeting, the way I've structured it is to try to avoid a significant overload and say, you know, hey, you said something 12 slides ago and don't remember what it was about. So we're going to pause for discussion and questions similar to we've done before moving on. I want to make sure everybody is on track with this. So I wanted to start with a couple of the pages that we put in the proposed document. The proposed document is obviously not as complete as your final adopted document will be with all pieces in there. But as we go through tonight, I'm going to be referencing page numbers as they are on the footer of your printout or the footer of the PDF. For those of you that are looking at an electronic document, please look at the footers for the page numbers instead of the actual PDF document. So page numbers, Roman numeral 1 and 2, they're really, this document is really created to help provide an understanding of the funds. We have multiple funds within our budget that each must be balanced to the penny, and each of those will have matching revenues and matching expenditures. This provides a description of the funds and identifies where that revenue is coming from, as well as the purposes for that fund. On Roman numeral page 3 at the beginning of the document, we also have a 4-year summary of our resources. Resources is the term used for our revenues and our fund balances. Those are all monetary resources that are available through the year. And this is intended to give you a 4-year glimpse into those changes by fund. With Roman numeral page 4 as the requirements summary. In the same regard, a 4-year expense history showing actual expenditures per fund for 22-23 school year, as well as the 2023-24 school year. And then, of course, the adopted budgets for 2024-25 and proposed for 2025-26. It's key to note, as I mentioned, each of these funds must be perfectly balanced with the resources, meaning our revenues, and our requirements being exactly the same. As you flip between page 3 and page 4, you will see every single line in a budget column will balance. Once the actuals come in, you may have a variance in that your revenues may exceed your expenditures. You absolutely do not want your expenditures to exceed your revenues within a fund. It is our hope that these introductory pages just provide a little more insight into the purpose and the structure of these funds. And as we go through these following pieces, we'll go through that. So Throughout this presentation, to aid those of you with a paper document, I've got, again, the page numbers as the footer. If you want to flip to these pages to follow along, you can certainly do that. Our general fund resources start on page 1, actual numerical page 1. And I wanted to start tonight to explain that as a budget committee, part of your role is evaluating our projections. And to be able to evaluate those projections, you need to have some information about the assumptions that go into those figures. So I wanted to share with you tonight that for our general fund, the primary source of our revenues within our general fund is our state school fund. And it is using the March 3rd Oregon Department of Education state school fund estimate that is actually included in your binders. We also are projecting property tax revenue to increase approximately $320,000, which is approximately a 3.15% growth, and that is based on assessed value information provided to us by both Marion County and Clackamas County because of our tax basis being in both. And the budget, again, being proposed to you tonight is projecting a $2.136 million at this time ending fund balance for this 24-25 current school year. Again, that will hinge on the remaining activity through the remaining few weeks of this year. I am hopeful that that is a conservative figure and would love to find out that that resource is going to be much higher. But of course, we want to make sure that we take care of all of our remaining requirements this year. Within that general fund budgeted revenue, it's important to point out that our state sources, which is primarily state school fund, this also includes the high cost disability grant, but those items make up 72% of the revenue within this fund, with property taxes adding 21%. The state school fund formula has a very close relationship between property tax and the state school fund. If our property taxes were to go up $1 million, our state school fund goes down $1 million. That is to create an equitable balance throughout districts that have higher tax basis and make sure that students are funded relatively equitably. The other sources, I did want to point out, the intermediate and other sources, those are going to include revenues from our education service district, as well as right now we are seeing very healthy revenues from our interest earnings on our accounts with the local government investment pool, the Oregon State Treasury. As our fund balances continue to grow, that is a perk that will be additional operating resources for the district. The historical revenue by source, meaning state revenues, local revenues, or other revenues, is fairly consistent, but we can absolutely see that our proportionate share of revenue coming from the state is actually growing. So we really, really do rely on that state school fund for a majority of our general fund revenues. Within our general fund requirements, which begin on page 36, we have a number of assumptions for our budgeted expenses. Within that requirements section, you are going to see a number of functions. And a function is what defines the activity for which we are spending those funds. You're going to see a function of 1111, and that's going to imply that we're spending money on instruction of kindergarten through 5th graders. Each of those are called out in your document, again, starting on page 36. But what I wanted to share with you is what we call our objects, and that is, you can see line by line, you're going to see a 100, you're going to see the 100 series, you're going to see the 200 series. These are how we identify the type of expenditure. So you're going to see in bold on your report that the 100s costs refer to salary costs. That is pure gross wages. Yet the 200 series are the costs that are associated with those wages. Your PERS, your Social Security and Medicare taxes, your unemployment, your workers' compensation, and all the associated, what we call associated payroll costs. In the 300 series, these are purchased services, also often referred to as contracted services. And these assumptions are going to include the increases in contracted staff and services. So our substitutes, our nursing, our transportation, our school resource officers, essentially a number of primarily staffing related costs, but with companies that we contract with versus being in-house. Also, you're going to find a 400 series. Those are going to outline the expenditures we are projecting for supplies and materials. We have some increases projected in this proposed budget to focus on curriculum adoptions and other investments to support student achievement and move that dial. One of the things I wanted to point out that throughout this document, you may see some year-over-year decreases in the 500 series. 500 series objects are to pay for capital expenditures. As we're going to go into a little more detail here a little bit later, we are developing a capital reserve fund. And so the reallocation of those expenditures out of the general fund into a capital reserve is going to be seen. Our assumptions in the 600 series are a little painful. We are being advised to project an 18% increase in our insurance for property, liability, vehicles. At nearly $500,000, an 18% increase is a big hit. We are seeing those same increases in licensing and fees across the board. When you see a 700 or an 800 series, the 700 series in the objects are telling us that those are budgeted funds for what we call interfund transfers. We've talked to you about the requirement for the general fund to pass money over to the food services fund to take care of the operational deficits. Those are budgeted on a 700 series of objects. And then finally, our 800 series is showing what we are projecting or proposing for a contingency and an unappropriated reserve. I share this because I have some charts that I wanted to share with you as to where those expenditures are going. That 100 series that we discussed is salaries. That makes up far and away the largest proportion of the expenditures within the general fund. That 200 series that I spoke about are the benefits, the PERS costs, the taxes, the employer burden for each gross dollar. And then purchase services, as I discussed, those are substitutes, those are our nurses, those are our school resource officers, our bus drivers that essentially are additional staff supporting our students in our instruction, but are contracted through an outside agency. I share this to represent the blue, the orange, and the green, and to see how much of our revenue is out the door in expenditures directly related to people and services that are directly supporting those students. There is not a lot left to work with. Supplies and materials is the light blue line. We cannot cut enough paper to make a difference in moving the dial. For the first time, I'm extremely pleased to see the brick colored section with contingency and reserves. That is a piece that we're very, very proud to be showing here tonight. The navy blue section, what's called transfers, again, those are the pieces where we talked about supporting our other funds, but that also includes a transfer for a capital reserve fund. I thought it would be helpful to see how we are budgeting our expenditures within the functions, which are, again, the programmatic areas in which we spend our money. You can notice a significant reduction towards the top in our interfund transfer and other category. That terrible orange line for interfund transfers and other was the TAN that we had to pay back last year. Very, very happy to be able to reallocate that to where it is intended to be. You will see that we are pleased to be able to show, that significant allocation at the very top to unappropriated reserves. That was nothing in the past. We have got a significant increase there to what was previously zero, and proposing a similar contingency to what we've had in the past. I apologize, want to double check my notes. Between those two lines there at the top, the unappropriated reserves and a contingency, this is where we are presenting to you a budget with well over a $2.9 million ending fund balance, in addition to some reserve funds that put us well above the $3 million mark in funds that are set aside for future uses. I want to take a moment to clarify, though, the difference between a contingency and an unappropriated reserve. It's very important that our board and our budget committee understand that. Contingency funds are available for, exactly as the word means, an emergency that happens or an unexpected expense, a revenue that may not come in as expected, and those contingency funds can be authorized to be used within this budget year that we are showing you. The unappropriated reserves are not available to be used within the budget year, barring a major emergency. It is very, very rare that the state will allow those to be accessed. So it is very important, while we want to have reserves that are not easily available, we also need to make sure that contingency is sufficient. And what we are proposing to you tonight, we believe that that $1 million contingency is sufficient within this budget.
So in order to use something like an unappropriated reserve, you would have to, in essence, craft a supplemental budget, correct?
Actually, that is, unfortunately, even a supplemental budget does not allow you to touch it.
If it allows you to have to use it for
state authority, you would need to have had a building burned down. You would have had to, it is truly natural disaster. I hate to say natural, it is a disaster level emergency that would be required to allow a district to tap unappropriated reserves.
Would those then be available potentially the next budget cycle?
100%. And the reason for this is that I think it's very critical that the district continue to plan for future years as enrollment numbers continue to be very volatile. And it's very important that Silver Falls has reserves that are available, whether it's for 2026-27, whether it's for the next biennium, but ensuring that it's not just the savings account in the same bank that you can do a quick transfer to checking. You want to go put those funds maybe over with your investment guy, and it takes a little more work, or I shouldn't say a little more work in this case, it would take a significant act to be able to access those funds. In addition to showing the year-over-year comparison of what programs are receiving our proposed budget, what type of expenses is this proposed budget going to pay for? So I wanted to demonstrate that you're going to see we've had an increase in salaries, but yet that proportionate increase in benefit costs is there due to the disproportionate increase in PERS costs. We are showing a slight increase in purchase services. Again, all of our costs are going up there. A slight increase in supplies and materials. A beautiful decrease in other objects. Again, that was where the TAM loan was. We definitely would like that to go away. And then, of course, exactly what we're saying, very nice increase in contingency and reserves. I have combined those in this graph just to show, demonstrate the significant growth in long-term financial stability that we're doing with that. The transfers are showing an increase. As we've been alluding to, we are proposing a budget to you tonight that not only takes care of the transfers that are required in a typical budget year for our food service program, for some of our debt services that are general fund supports, but again, also to establish the critical need for capital reserves to be put aside into another fund. That shows as an expenditure out of this fund, and it shows as revenue in another fund. That is, again, part of the discussion of why I would highly recommend we take a look at our board policy and possibly not budget against total revenues, or possibly not have a policy that specifies an ending fund balance against total revenues, but possibly against general fund revenues, because that expense that's being transferred out of the general fund was recorded as revenue in the general fund, and it will again be recorded as revenue in another fund. So with that, this is intended to be a high-level overview of where the general fund revenues are being sourced from, where those expenditures are going. We'd be happy to answer any specific questions on the general fund. I did skip over a very important piece I did want to point out to each of you. I apologize for that. I had my note here and I kind of skipped over some of that. On page 42 of 180, if we're looking at the footnote, page 42 of 180, I want to point out that on function 1220, when you look at the total function line on page 42, you are going to see a very, very drastic change in the what we call total function 1220, the FTE column that was budgeted in 2024-25, and a very significant increase in the 25-26 budget. However, I also want to ask you to turn to the top of page 44, where you are seeing total function 1250, and you are seeing the same decrease in FTE within that function. Each of these two functions are very, very closely related. They both relate to special education services. And what that is doing is finding that our coding of these staff did not align as best as it could with the state mandated chart of accounts. The state prescribes these functions to districts to allow them to do comparisons. What is Silver Falls investing in function 1220 versus Jervis in function 1220? How about 1250 versus Jervis's 1250? And I apologize for using, for the example.
Feel free.
But it's very critical that when we identify these pieces that could be more closely aligned, as we want to become absolutely transparent, that is very concerning in a report to see those skews, but those are due to reclassifications in the budget. And those actually were changes made in our 2024-25 school year after the budget was very quickly produced last year. So those changes have been made in all of our reporting for this current fiscal year, but of course skew the data that you're reviewing if you're reviewing some of those totals. I just wanted to point that out because that was a big one. So I'll open it up though to questions on general fund, any of the pages within that section of the document or information we shared.
Kim, on page 36, I noticed a huge increase in textbooks.
Yes.
Is that because of early literacy? Okay.
Great question. And actually, because this is general fund, our early literacy funds will not be reflected in here. This is actually due to an adoption that we are looking at for our K-5 curriculum and the donation.
For grades 3-5. So early,
Yes.
we're looking at an adoption for core reading products, K-5, and the early literacy. It's related to early literacy. The 3-5 grades are not allowed to be used. Grant funds, you can't use it for that. So the 3-5, we have a donor that has agreed to help pay for that 3-5 adoption, and the K-2 will be paid for by the early literacy grant. So it's a split payment.
Okay.
Wonderful. Yes, and the offset to that is, of course, in our general fund revenue projections for contributions from private sources.
Is the Silver Creek seismic grant, or Silver Crest seismic grant, is that in this year's budget or is it in next year's?
It is in both.
Both,
So
okay.
that will be, we will be going over that in Fund 430.
Okay.
Yes.
Kim, not sure if it's the right time, but page 30, under Fund 630, printing services. Remember last year we were a little off on our budget projection. Is that where this would be captured, and do we account for that for this coming?
So, great question. Fund 630 was specific to essentially what we call an enterprise service. We had a print shop here at the high school that would perform services for other schools within our district and charge them. That is specific to what that fund was for. The miss in the budget this year in regard to printer leases and those sort of items is it is back in this budget. I apologize, I'm trying to recall what number that is in 26. It is added back into this budget, though. I apologize, not being interpretation, transportation. It is in this general fund. I know it's in the 2000 section. 2574 sticks in my head, but that may not be 2550.
And I know there's a lot of
It is 2574. Wow, that was a pull. You can, sorry. Sometimes these, you never know, right?
That freaks me out.
Sorry. Sorry.
Very impressive. What
You can
page is that
see
on?
my terrible budgeted dollar amount in 24-25 of 0, and now back to, unfortunately, $105,000 for this year. So
What page is that,
thank you.
Kim?
Page 68,
Thank you.
function 2574. Yes. That might have been the first thing I put in the budget this year.
Well, I want to thank you, first of all. You've been very conscientious of making the slides understandable for people that don't do what you do every day. So I want to commend you for being conscientious and really taking time to make sure that it is as clear as it can be for what we're talking about. And in the spirit of transparency and appreciation for how hard you work, maybe this is a bold question, but I'm just curious, what sections are you most nervous about that we would like to just draw our attention to now? Things that I remember talking about, but my memory could be not accurate. Cybersecurity, cyber technology stuff that kind of came, we forgot that we have to re-enroll in this, and that was hundreds of thousands of dollars. I can't remember what we have to pay for benefits for our RIF employees or how long that we have to continue for that. So I remember those are some pain points.
Absolutely.
Not that you have to speak to those, but I'm just curious, what are you uncomfortable with, and what are we doing to stay ahead of the curve this year?
So in terms of the general fund budget, this is probably the most comfortable piece of this entire document tonight. Okay. The general fund is representing, I hate to say it, but a fraction of, you have an $83.8 million budget in front of you, and the general fund is only, I hate to say only, but it's only 56 million of that.
Right.
The general fund is pretty static in terms of our state school fund's going to shift and move, our expenditures are going to shift and move, but we have a little bit more what I would call confidence in this fund than I do in the next group that we're going to go through, which are our grants, our federal funding.
Sure.
Those are the pieces that definitely keep me up at night. You definitely touched on one of my concerns for operationally, as your finance director, part of the role, huge part of the role is risk management. Cybersecurity is a huge concern for me. Our tech director did an excellent job of going through our needs. Our insurance company actually has very strict requirements of what we must implement by each June 30th to ensure we can obtain cyber crime insurance for the next year. Unfortunately, we were victims of a breach with a third party of Silver Falls. Their data was compromised, which unfortunately contained our staff data back to possibly 2009. That was a very difficult thing.
If that wasn't just us,
it was
that
not.
correct?
It
That
was
was
nearly
statewide.
Yeah, nearly every district in this state, certainly the majority of districts in this state, contracted with this company who unfortunately was impacted by a cybersecurity event. So, you know, that remains a huge concern because without, we are crippled. If our internet goes down, my hard drive crashed right before the board meeting last night. I was, oh my gosh, I can't do this, right? Without access to technology. So I would say, honestly, you know, our risk management is a big concern. That technically is within this general fund. We have excellent insurance policies, but, you know, we are part of a statewide trust of school districts. And unfortunately, that trust is seeing more and more and more claims. We're seeing cyber claims. Unfortunately, we're seeing some inappropriate behavior claims. Unfortunately, it's abuse situations. And so we and Tony here work very closely with our insurance companies to make sure that we are doing everything we can to mitigate as much risk as possible. We certainly don't want to tell our kids they can't go out to recess because you could break an arm, but we are going to find ways to make sure they're not maybe jumping off the top of something and trying to make sure our staff are well trained in mitigating some of those risks.
Yeah, and another thing we're doing this year is we're paying particular attention to our purchase service contracts because of that risk in cybersecurity, to make sure that we're looking at in those contracts what happens when there's a data breach, who's responsible for that. For instance, we know with the issue we dealt with this last year, a saving grace to that was that the entity who held all that data, that included our data, they picked up a lot of that responsibility, and our people we have with our insurance carriers helped to make sure that happened. But as you see, there's a fair amount of purchase service contracts we do have.
Sure.
And because of that, it's very important that when we review those contracts, we're asking that question, what if,
Yep.
right? Because if that responsibility ultimately does fall on the district, so if we don't have indemnification from it, then we could get into trouble pretty quickly, right? So we're making sure to watch that. Because yes, you could technically go to court and try to fight for that, but oftentimes you're gonna spend as much money as you
Right.
would doing the homework up front, which is making sure it's addressed in your contracts.
So we're sending, like today, we have a bid from a company to do a crisis alert system that is like for safety. And so we actually asked them to provide a heightened document regarding the data breach because their contract did not cover it correctly. So we had Brett submitted another document to them, and I have it in my email right now, which they signed. So we are requiring that our vendors go the extra mile, and so we're checking as I'm not just the superintendent, I'm also the curriculum director, so every single piece of curriculum that we exchange student data through and staff data through, all those have to have the correct data breach agreements and privacy agreements and protective clauses, or they don't pass the test to get into the district. So we're super careful with that.
You also mentioned concerns about costs related to our prior reductions in force, and we will be addressing that in Fund 620 later on tonight.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
yes, yes. Well, perfect. If it's agreeable, I think we'll move on to our next batch, Funds 201 through 299. So per the state mandated chart of accounts, all of the funds that start with a 2 are what are known as special revenue funds. Some of these fund numbers are mandated by the state, and some of them are up to district discretion. The revenues for these funds begin on page 4 of the document, and we have a fairly significant number of funds. The funds that start with a 20, I apologize, I forgot to move my slide. Anything that starts with a 20 is indicating that it's a federal fund, and that is primarily our federal grants. And this is the piece, I was asked what kind of makes me a little nervous. This is the piece in the budget that does make us very nervous right now. And to add to it, with a federal fiscal year not starting until October 1, that is even additionally complex. The federal grants remain uncertain, but this proposed budget reflects the latest information we have available, and as Superintendent Kellison shared, we believe it may even, we would like to hope that we have under budgeted our revenue for that purpose. If it can come in flat, that's great. We do have slight reductions in the funding built in, as well as the reduction of certain funds. So specifically, you'll see in Fund 201, which is of course our Title I funding, our Title II funding, and then unfortunately Title III, we are projecting 0 for the revenue, and then Title IV. While some of these might show, Title II specifically shows an increase over the 24-25 amount, that is actually due to our 24-25 actuals coming in higher than was budgeted. So this is a conservative number for 25-26.
And if I can add to that, that while you're looking at a budget proposal that's for 25-26, the uncertainty in these federal funds has a particular impact in our decision making when we're thinking about items and expenditures for this year because of what could happen in the year 26-27. If you the political nature of federal funding in that, there are individuals out there in this business that have projected that the 26-27 year might even be more challenging from federal funds, just because the reality is you're going into midterms in 26-27. People are going to have to sell that they can be good fiscal stewards. So that did have that. You know, it's not only a 25-26 piece, but you're looking ahead, and then because of that, when those factors looking ahead, it had an impact when we're thinking about what can we even look at bringing into this year's budget, because any cost for this year gets multiplied next year, because again, you're going to have salary increases, you'll have PERS increases, so it's all related here. So that's a very good question that you brought up, because it has multi-year impacts, even when you're looking at only 1 year.
Kim, the federal money, how is it dispersed? How does it come in? Since our fiscal year is different than ours, are we still getting money up till October, or how does that work?
Correct. The current year funding has been secured, and we are claiming reimbursements as often as possible too.
Yeah, we're spending every dollar quickly.
Well, yeah, believe me, starting in January, lots of claims were going in very frequently by districts to make sure that costs are being covered. Our federal grants are reimbursement grants, so we cannot receive those funds until they are spent on the appropriate expenditures. However, yes, we are definitely spending those funds. It does require some complexities when our year ends maybe on June 30th, and then you have September payroll, and a lot of this focuses on people on a prior federal year grant, and so there's always some carryover and movement with that, but yes, that's always part of the fund. So anyway, we have our IDEA fund, Individuals with Disability Education Act. That is a huge source of revenue for Silver Falls School District. Fortunately, is quite protected in a number of pieces of the federal legislature, but we are projecting a slight reduction. Our figure this year came in above $700,000 on our actuals versus the budget of $670 you're seeing last year. Same thing last year. We were putting a number on it using the best information we had, and so again, that projection this year is reduced a little bit. For Fund 209, that is something we use for miscellaneous federal grants. We had a very small grant last year that was very complex because the funding was part federal and part state, which did not make it fun from an accounting perspective, but that has moved to purely state funded now, which is simplifying the books a little bit. We've talked about those additional revenue sources for the federal are going to be up in the air, but I also wanted to address our funds in the 2.5 series. Those, anything with a 2.5x number is a state grant. And that, the revenue projections in here in that 2.5 series reflect a mix of some grant funds that are confirmed, some that are pending allocations, and then some are truly a projection based on past funding and past trends. We have certain grants that the application or the award will not be announced until possibly August or September. So planning for these becomes, again, a crisis of confidence is the way I kind of like to, say it, that these could have a huge impact on operations. So we're very careful what we put into these, staffing and what are, by projecting possibly a little low, while it might, create some tension in the budget for a little bit, we definitely would rather do that than have all of a sudden a significant shortfall in a fund that takes care of our staff.
Kim, do you have Medicaid administrative claiming represented in the 200 or somewhere else?
We do it in General Fund 4202 under Medicaid per the PBAM. So our Medicaid administrative claiming, I believe we had about 100,000 on the revenue side in General Fund 4202. So, yep. So within these special revenue funds, again, all of our 200s, one of the big pieces, I talked about the 20X numbers are our federal grants, 25X are our state grants. In that 200 series, we also have Fund 299, which is specific to our nonprofit food services account. And so this bucket has significant revenues, and I wanted to just show that primarily those revenues are state, but when we're talking this amount of dollars with 24% of that attributable to the federal government, there is significant concern for those fundings. I made a note on here that these charts include the Fund 270, which you can find in your booklet starting on, I apologize, page 19. So Fund 270, you hear us talk about our student body funds or our agency funds. And these are the accounts that are held by our schools for specific student activities. This is a bit of a unique piece in the budget because those are fully directed by the student activities. So we budget revenues based on historical data. We've had years where certain groups will have a huge fundraising event and they may raise $150,000 and then the next year might be a zero. So what we do is we budget revenues based on historical data to ensure that we have a revenue source to budget for expenditure appropriations, and we'll talk about that a little bit more on the expense side. But for the purposes of this grant, of this graph, I pulled them out because most of their revenue is local sources, and you can see with the amount of revenue plus beginning fund balance they have in here, it would make it look like we don't really have any federal or state resources coming in these funds. So just had that note on there for you guys.
Question from Josh.
Yeah, sorry, Kim, and this is me trying to figure out which accounts are under what, but the state timber fund. The question I have about it is, I'm seeing in our budget, and I'm grateful that I'm seeing it, it says we're not anticipating any money.
Nope.
But on our AMDRW, the very first page, it says we're collecting 40. And all those other numbers match up in the accounts, but I'm just curious why there's a discrepancy what it says there for actually what we're budgeting.
So that, excellent question. So that state school fund estimate page that you're looking at is a result of numbers that we provide to the state. Our historical revenue in timber is, and we're talking the state timber on 3104. Is that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
So our actuals in 22-23 were about $7,000. The next year, 54. If you go back, you're going to see that kind of swing all the time. On the document you're looking at that has the state school fund estimate, we provide numbers based on our best guess. And again, as I have referenced, I usually reference it as property tax has a push and pull effect on the state school fund. State timber is included in what they call that upper quadrant of that state school fund. State timber is included in that number. So if we get state timber, they're going to reduce the state school fund. If we get zero state timber, they're going to increase the state school fund. So I kind of put a $40,000 buffer into the state school fund by putting that $40,000 there, because they reduced our state school fund estimate by $40,000 by me putting that above the line. It gets a little bit complex, but I give an example. There are a number of districts over towards the coast whose state timber revenue is so high, they get zero state school fund dollars.
Jewel.
Neoconi, I think is
Neoconi,
one,
yep.
yes. So it's a very unique formula in that certain buckets are looked at to equitably distribute state school fund revenues amongst the state. Just like some areas get more property tax, some areas get more timber, they get less of the state school fund pot. So yes, I did put that 40,000 in there. That has been our practice all along. If that comes in at zero, we get 40,000 more on the state school fund side. But for the budget, I don't want to count on that revenue.
Either do I, so thank you very much, Kim.
Sorry for kind of getting into the weeds, but that's starting to, yeah, great questions. For these same funds, our requirements start on page 80. I've put these slides in here for those of you that want to jump around and follow along. But in that Fund 200 series, I wanted to share how we're coming up with our budgeted expenses. For salaries and benefits, exactly like we did in the general fund, our projections account for our experience steps, the cost of living adjustments, which we're very fortunate that we have 2 agreements with our associations that we are confident in those figures for next year. Some targeted staffing additions that Superintendent Kellison spoke to, and of course that significant increase in PERS rates. Our purchase services actually are showing a decrease in expenditures, and that is due to the transition to an in-house food service management model. But you're also going to see a significant increase in our expenditures in supplies and materials, because we are now going to be purchasing our own food and materials versus through a contracted service. So within these special revenue funds, these are our budgeted expenses. And again, similar story. Salaries, benefits, and those purchase services, which are going to include our substitutes and any other professionals that work within these funds, make up the vast majority. The supplies and materials chunk is, again, much, much larger. And again, that is primarily due to our food service fund, which I'm going to expand on here shortly. You know, we're just very excited for what this could mean for our food service fund. I really want to point out, though, that within these special revenue funds, the revenue side and the expenditure side are directly linked. We must budget revenue and we must budget expenditures to that exact same dollar amount, but each of these expenditures must be looked at, that if that revenue does not appear, those expenditures cannot happen. So that is absolutely critical. We must budget to have appropriation authority to spend that money should the revenue materialize. However, if it does not, we will not have the expenditures. A perfect example of that is in your revenues for Fund 256, the Early Literacy Fund, and that is for revenue. I'm going to be on page 17. I have budgeted revenue at $480,000. If you look at the documents from Oregon Department of Education right now, they are going to give you 2 amounts that we might get for this grant. We might get 232 somewhere there, or we might get 480, depending upon what happens in the legislature in the coming days. If I had budgeted at 232 and it came in at 480, we would only have expenditure authority up to $232,000. So instead, we budgeted for the higher revenue, we budgeted higher expenditures, but we have not put people in there. We have not filled positions. We have not allocated it to things that we cannot do without. So
can I give them an example?
Absolutely, please.
So like we could increase our assessment system for K-5. We could add STAR for reading back in. And when we do that, that would be about $25,000. That's something that the early literacy grant would pay for grades K through 2. And then we could allocate a little bit to 4 or 5. So it would pay for most of it. And so that's an example of something you could put in there. And so I have that sitting in my feed, and on July 1, when I know, I could submit the PO and the requisition and move forward with that purchase, knowing that that extra early literacy funds have arrived.
We're very hopeful. We're
Hopeful.
hearing a lot of positive support for that. We believe that to come through, but again, those expenditures, while authorized through a budget document, in our world are only authorized, of course, once we know that revenue is guaranteed and allocated to the district. That holds true for multiple grants within these 200 funds. Within these same special revenue funds, to show where the money is going, we are investing more in our people, in their salaries and their benefits, of course. We are reducing what we're spending on purchase services, increasing our supplies and materials. But what I wanted to really be able to show you is for our food service fund, this is where the movement happens. So within this budget proposal, our food service fund, yes, we are adding a manager employed by Silver Falls School District instead of a manager employed by a contracted service. So you're going to see our purchase services decrease tremendously, reallocate those funds to supplies and materials so that we can direct our own food service company, ensuring our students are served healthy, quality meals, having breakfast and lunch every day, and have it fully managed in-house. We're really looking forward to this program, but it does represent a big shift in where your revenue, or excuse me, where your expenditures are being budgeted within this document.
This is an effort to clean up something that's been in the negative area for an entire decade. And I think, it gives us an opportunity to recreate something that can be even better for kids. So I think it could be higher quality and, maybe not go in the whole $400,000. Sorry.
Hey, that is the last, we would love for
It's
that.
kind of a basic question, but with taking it in-house, we anticipate the overall cost is less than we've seen in the past few years, having a purchase service, or
That is.
maybe we don't know yet, but, which is fair. 'cause
We
it's a year
don't
to start
know
out.
yet. We do believe year one will incur startup costs that may not need to be repeated. We do know food costs are increasing. We do know labor costs are increasing. But we also believe that by having a in-house management, we also can look at our overall structure and efficiencies and make sure that we are doing everything we can to operate as fiscally prudent as we can, but also ensure that our meals are the best quality, best availability. There are a lot of values to it. Absolutely, the goal is to reduce what I refer to as a subsidy, that transfer from that general fund. I have budgeted a very similar transfer for this first year because I do believe we may have some startup costs. There are some software programs that our contractor pays for. There are some supplies that we may need to invest in to increase our efficiencies, right? If we just need more trays and serving things and racks and storage, let's do it. If that, there may be a one-time cost to those, but let's figure out what we can do to improve our efficiencies and also really relieve some of the load on our staff, because just like all departments, food service is also struggling to keep up with the demand. They have seen a 40% increase in the meals they've served, and we have not increased their staff. They are absolutely our rock stars out there for our kiddos, and serving 325,000 meals this year is my projection to our kids. I don't know, it just gives me almost goosebumps, right? I mean, that's what we're here for. So yes, we absolutely believe that we can increase efficiencies, which of course then can help with the bottom line. So.
And give our staff more control over menus and what they offer, and things that are more student-driven, you know, like what the students really want to eat. And when I said quality, I don't mean that the quality's bad right now, it's not, but just more where it's student-focused, where students can have some input.
And with the even with the changes, when Kim and I presented that to the food service staff, the great majority of them said, they came to us after the meeting and said, you know, we're going to do this. We're going to make it work. So they definitely have a sense of ownership and pride in the work they do. And I think that alone kind of gave me some comfort in knowing that we can make this work. And if not, it's not going to be because of the efforts of the staff. They're committed to this.
And excited. They're excited to try something new and to be able to branch out and offer things, and, you know, they're excited about that opportunity.
Sorry, I had a question.
Yeah.
Well, number one, thank you, and I'm very excited about this because I've been here long enough to remember back when they made the switch to our current vendor and the tears and misery that were shed over that. But you did say that we've been losing consistently, was it 300,000 to 400,000?
It has escalated, but
But yet the demand for meals was up. So what's the disconnect there? Like, what's been causing that loss?
So our reimbursement rate increase on per meal through the federal and state governments has not kept pace with our increased labor and benefit costs. Our staff are phenomenal, and they are so valued, but our benefit costs are more than 100%, more than $1 on every dollar of pay.
Okay, that explains it.
And I think the unique configuration of our district where we have so many outlying rural buildings contributes to that as well.
And the third piece is that even with the increase in the number of meals that we're serving, we don't get the benefit of the economies of scale of that because under the current contract arrangement, we pay the same amount per meal, whether it's the 1,000th meal or if it's the 10,000th meal. So you can see you combine those three factors, that has an impact.
Yeah.
We're very, very excited. We joined a cooperative with about 80 other school districts in a purchasing co-op for the food, able to explore more local options with, you know, some of those pieces, exploring additional grants. You know, just having somebody in-house, I believe, is actually going to allow us to be more in the weeds of the operations and fully understand that and just really improve everything from the fiscal to the workload to the efficiencies and again, empower our staff. They are beyond skilled at what they do. They care about those kids so much, and it really warms my heart. You know, you mentioned, you know, remembering when we had to transition to a contracted service. That was after some concerns over our programs here. But, you know, my mother-in-law retired from the kitchen here at the high school. My father-in-law retired from maintenance here at the high school. I just, you know, that's, it goes a long way for me. So this feels really good, and yeah, I'm looking forward to this for the community.
And Elise Hansen will be here at the June board meeting to go over some of those updates and talk about those cooperative arrangements that we're doing with vendors and different things.
I've got something real quick, sorry guys. So this has been something, Hillary, you bring up some good points. One of the things about food service, you know, my kid tells me like, well, the food's gross, so she doesn't eat it. But the other thing that I've been wanting and advocating for a long time is just close the campus. Don't let kids be rushing all across town to go to McDonald's or Taco Bell or KFC, which that food's not a whole lot better. And it creates a disparity between the kids that can leave and they can't, the kids that have cars, that don't have cars, the cool kids, the not cool kids. I would just like, that would increase. Well, I'm excited to try the food next year. I'm going in there to buy some of that and try it because I bet it's going to be delicious. But I think that's a part of it. There's a lot of kids that aren't partaking because they don't like the quality of it and they're leaving.
Yeah, I had a question. I'm afraid that you may have said this and I missed it, but I'm going to ask anyways. For the food service, the free lunch program we have now, we qualified because the threshold changed, right?
Correct.
So what happens if the threshold changes again?
Oh,
Am I
we-
reading this right, that it's like nearly $1 million
Correct.
that's from the federal
revenue.
government? Yeah.
Yeah, so the revenue shifted a little bit, the proportion that the federal pay and the state pay when we went to the community eligibility provision, the no-cost meals for students. The revenue kind of shifted in where it comes from. We did qualify due to a reduction in the state, what they call CEPI, the community eligibility provision incentive. The state was able to drop to 25% to align with the federal. The federal level had been 25%, but the state was still at 40%. So we would not have been able to offer free meals to all because we were above the, we were not below 40 or above the 40%. I apologize. We are a little bit above the 25%, not significantly. We are kind of hovering around that 30% mark, 31. So there actually was a lot of chatter this spring, late winter, about increasing that 25% to some ungodly numbers. We heard 60% at one point. At this point, we feel fairly confident that is not going to happen right now, but there are always uncertainties in federal programs. It would be devastating to our community to have to go back to students paying for meals, in my opinion. I think this has met a need that was not being served. So, but our revenue, we would still get revenue for students that were qualified for free and reduced meals, and then we would still, unfortunately, then have revenue come back in from families. Yeah.
And is it correct that that has been a little bit problematic in the past with maybe unpaid balances?
Maybe a little bit of that.
Just
yes.
so the reimbursement we're getting is more reliable?
It's definitely more reliable. That is absolutely it. It reduces burden, postage, follow-up, and just that icky feeling of, sorry, I know your kid was hungry, but we really need you to pay your bill, right? I mean, now we did everything we could to collect because those are taxpayer funds. And it's been actually pretty great as we implemented the community eligibility program. We had to reach out to about 2,900 families or 2,900 accounts with positive balances. Many of those families have donated those to pay off some of the students' negative balances, and that is beyond grateful. We've sent out hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of checks in refunds. So there will be a little bit of a negative revenue, if you will, on that because those truly are refunds out of prior claimed revenue. But it's overall been a great program, and those are our stakeholders' dollars sitting in those accounts for those students, so they are due back to them. So continuing to work on that.
And then one more question
Yeah.
on the lunches. Does
Sure.
this include summer?
Yes,
meals
30
as well?
in the expenditure side in the 200s, we have to break out our summer food expenditures under 3101. So we have some temporary salaries under function 3101, which is our summer food service program. So that must be broken out separately. So we will be starting that on July 1 after our contracted service serves the meals the day before, and we're trying to get our food in to serve our food the next day and their food out the door the day. So Elise Hansen is a gem, and she is working on a lot of logistics right now. Yeah. So with that, I'd like to move forward then on to our 300 funds. Everything in the 300 series are debt service funds. The assumptions for the revenues in each of these funds, I've broken it out by fund. Fund 310 is our, and I apologize, I should have put the names of them up there for you, but it is our Silverton High School construction bond. So it was for the building of this school, phase 2. And so that bond is still being paid, is going to be retiring soon, and there will be additional discussions on that. But the revenue for that is driven by the property tax levy approval by this committee. Part of the resolution that would be provided to you is to resolve to assess a property tax. This is on your property tax statement as the SHS bond. I may have the description wrong on it, but it is a separate line item on there, and that is very similar to prior years. We assess exactly I shouldn't say exactly. We calculate what our bond payments are. We get information from both Marion and Clackamas County on what actually is collected against what's assessed, and then determine how much we must assess to get enough in the door to make our bond payments. The budgeted revenue in Fund 320. This is our PERS bonds. We have multiple PERS bonds. Every dollar of payroll is assessed a percentage. For next year, it's going to be, I believe I have 14.5% in there is what I have. But that is assessed against every dollar of payroll and is expensed in the fund that payroll is charged and recorded as revenue, again, into Fund 320. And then those funds are used to then expense again to go out the door for our bond payments. So you can see exactly there that the assessment against payroll is about $4.2 million to pay those bond debt, PERS bonds. Fund 330 revenue, that is the debt service we have for the conversion of the Schlater Street campus for occupancy by the Silverton Middle School. We receive construction excise tax receipts for construction and remodeling in our area, but we also must have an interfund transfer, and you can see that I've budgeted that we will need to have the general fund support that with $121,000 this year. Again, construction excise taxes are very hard to predict because you're trying to predict how many people are going to be going and getting permits in the next 12 months, and that can be very, very difficult to predict. So we've got that on there. And then our revenues on Fund 340. This is actually a pretty unique fund. Senate Bill 1149 was a energy improvement project or bill in which each of us, if we were to look at our PGE bill, have a line item for a little extra tax. And that is collected by our utility partners and passed along to school districts. And that is for school districts to improve to energy efficient lighting to reduce their costs on their energy bills. Years ago, and I believe this was done, in the late 2017, 2019, somewhere in that range, Silverton took an advance, if you will, took out a full faith and credit loan to complete those lighting upgrades in advance of those funds coming in. By doing that, it allowed the energy bills to be reduced sooner, and yet now as those payments come in through PGE as the utility carrier in our area, those payments are now being applied against that debt. We are seeing reduced energy bills, but again, that does require another interfund transfer of approximately $39,000. That would be an excellent project to be able to try to estimate what our power bills would have been in the general fund. Did we save $40,000 throughout the year on our power bills to essentially cover this interfund transfer? As I was building this budget, I thought that'd be a great project when staffing and time allow to try to estimate what would our bills have been based on our prior kilowatt usage and current rates versus our current usage. And so that'd be, anyway.
To each their own. I've got a list of fun projects, and that's not on there. But, to each their own. That's fine.
Yes. Yes. Well said. Well said.
Makes sense.
So again, within those debt funds, you're going to see property taxes, which I should clarify that is the high school bond levy, makes up the majority of that. Payroll charges, of course, make up another big majority of that. Again, those PERS bonds are what get us a rate reduction from PERS, which feels really hard to say right now when we just saw an 8% increase, but you know, when we're paying, you know, say, you know, 14% average, 13% average for next year, if we had no side accounts, we'd be paying closer to 29%. As I shared at some previous board meetings, over the course of the years that we've had PERS bonds, we have saved $14 million over what we would have paid to PERS without side bond. If we would have calculated what we paid to PERS without side accounts, PERS bonds, versus what we've paid on the bonds themselves, it is a $14 million savings for taxpayers. It's been great. The requirements within these same funds, the expenses within Fund 310, again, Silverton High School, those are purely determined by our bond amortization schedule. We know exactly what we owe in principal and interest. Fund 320, our PERS bonds, we know exactly what our amortization schedule is going to be. What is our principal and interest for each? Same for the Schlater amortization schedule, and of course, the lighting project. That was kind of a pretty redundant slide, I apologize. But this is showing you that we, of those payments, principal, interest, and then of course there are some reserves in there should some of those revenues possibly not come in. I do believe our revenues are going to come in as projected, so I do believe our reserves will be able to remain there as well. So those debt service funds are pretty straightforward. They are very defined. We will have some changes coming in the next couple budget cycles as our last payment for Silverton High School is in mid-2027, and our last payments on the original 2003 and 2004 PERS bonds are also in, unfortunately, December of 2027. However, our rate credits expire in July of 2027, so there's going to be some more PERS talk in the next biennium, unfortunately.
And I heard you say that and until that money's in the bank, knowing that this is a lot of the projection, we're not robbing from Peter to pay Paul on the anticipation of any of this coming in.
These, so in this specific group of funds, I did say that in regard to special revenue funds, but in this specific group, we are making our bond payments whether the money comes in or not. So
Yeah.
these projections actually are some that I spend the most time on. They look very, very simple, but trying to project how many people are actually going to pay their property taxes, that's a little bit tough. I mean, I can tell you, they may tell us that 95.5% of the assessed value is, or excuse me, of the tax levy gets paid. I'm probably not going to go with 95.5 because if all of a sudden economy tanks and only 95.1 pay it, and we need to come up with, you know, another $500,000 to make our bond payment because it's not optional. So, you know, that's, we do look at that, and there may be some reserves, and then the next year you say, okay, things came in better than expected. 95.8% of the assessments were paid, and so we can adjust that a little bit year over year, but definitely very concerned about making sure we take care of our debt obligations as we are in a rebuilding phase, and our credit ratings and bond worthiness, I believe, is going to be of utmost importance.
Yeah.
Oop, apologize. So I kind of grouped a number of funds here together. The 400 series funds are capital funds, and the 600 series funds are going to be reserves. So within the 400 series, you're going to see Fund 410. This is brand new and super exciting. I after where we were sitting here 12 months ago, to be able to present this to you tonight is huge. We are identifying Fund 410 as a brand new capital reserve fund, and we are proposing a $500,000 general fund transfer to allow that fund to have $500,000 in it for capital improvement projects. We talked about Fund 430. I believe it might have been Josh or somebody was asking about the Silvercrest seismic retrofit project. We've had multiple schools blessed in this district with what are called seismic retrofits, where they're going to reinforce the buildings. It's a state grant to help reinforce the buildings against seismic damages. So all of that activity flows through Fund 430. The revenue that is projected for that is the amount of the grant that I anticipate may not be used before June 30th and may need to be expended after June 30th. If more gets spent before June 30th, this number could be too high, but I wanted to make sure that we had the spending authority to finish that project in the next fiscal year. In your Fund 600 series, we have Fund 610, an insurance reserve. And that revenue comes from things such as restitution. Unfortunately, we do have some students who might find it entertaining to damage materials. And we work with Marion County, and those students perform community service, and we get revenue back to help pay for some of those. There are some workers' compensation supports to help our workers return to work after an injury. Those revenues also go into this, what I would call a self-insurance reserve. We'll talk about some of the expenditures that come out of that shortly. We talked about the costs due to our reduction in force. Unemployment was a massive concern of ours after just the incredible reductions we had last year. I am very, very happy to say that the amount that we budgeted for potential expenses was not utilized. Our expenditures came in way less, and that is primarily due to our reduction in force lists. Our recall lists are essentially depleted. Essentially, by the start of the school year, all of our teachers either had obtained work elsewhere or had been brought back to Silver Falls and filled positions that had been vacated through attrition. Our classified list took us a little bit longer to work through, but it makes my heart very warm that we did not have people who needed as much state unemployment support as they did. For those of you that are new to our budget committee, it might be helpful to explain that the typical approach is that companies are charged a percentage against all payroll for all unemployment claims. The majority of school districts are self-insured, or what are known as reimbursing employers, and every unemployment application that is approved by the state is billed 100% to the district. So in a reduction in force situation, we were anticipating potentially 60, 70 people that may need 6 months of unemployment, and we are on the hook for that. With other districts around us at that same time talking about reductions, it was a very scary, scary time. I'm very pleased to say that I am proposing no additional revenue into that fund because we do not need to charge anything against payroll this year because we have enough reserves to cover what I project all of our expenditures to be this year. In a perfect world, possibly be enough for possibly even the 26-27 year. Within Fund 630, this is a fund that I am going to propose that we look at closing. This was our printing services. We talked about this a little bit earlier when we had essentially a print shop running at the high school. We no longer are doing that. We are simply covering printer costs and those sort of things at a district level and not running, in a sense, a enterprise operation for that. There is a $13,000 balance in there, and on the expenditure side, I am proposing an appropriation to transfer that into the general fund to support those costs that now live in that general fund. And then Fund 640 really also makes me happy. Brand new fund, a PERS reserve. What this is instead of, this allows us to expense a percentage against every dollar of payroll. It is expensed wherever that payroll is charged and recorded as revenue into Fund 640. And then that fund is set aside for future PERS liability costs. It is not currently allocated for use this year. One of the benefits of not needing to charge unemployment against payroll this year is we were able to redirect those savings. A very small portion of what unemployment would have been charged, we're redirecting that. And I am projecting we could have budgeting $338,000 deposited into that fund to help offset potential future PERS increases. Again, just showing you where the revenue is coming from. State grant revenues, the majority of that, of course, is the Silvercrest Seismic Program. And then the interfund transfer to capital reserve. I should have clarified that also includes interfund transfers from the payroll piece. I apologize, that is a little bit mislabeled, but that 24.4% is our own funds being set aside for those uses. I apologize, these are the capital funds, so that's why it's not on there. Capital fund, $500,000 interfund transfer to the capital reserve. The seismic program showing in the orange. For the 600 fund, again, beginning fund balance, that unemployment reserve is sufficient to cover our unemployment costs this year. Charges to other funds, this is where actually the payroll expense to the PERS reserve is coming from. And the requirement side for those exact same funds, the Fund 410, which again is our capital improvement fund that we are building. It's a little bit misleading to look at it because I am showing expenditures budgeted. However, because this is a capital reserve fund, if we have an emergency and need to be able to use that, we must have appropriation authority to be able to spend that. So you will see that $450,000 is appropriated for major capital work, an additional $50,000 appropriated for some contracted repairs or others that may not rise to that capital threshold. Again, what those needs are going to be would be determined at a later date, but if this appropriation was not there and this was set aside as unappropriated ending fund balance, as I explained earlier, if a roof caved in, we would have $500,000 we couldn't use to fix that roof. Fund 430, again, that's our Silvercrest seismic, and those are my anticipated remaining expenditures. You can see basically we are budgeting it all towards capital improvements with a little bit of appropriation if we need a contracted service to do some of those repairs. Within the 600 series, that self-insurance fund, those expenditures would be for replacing computers or some facility damage. One of the things that hit this fund in the past, some of you may remember the unfortunate incident at Butte Creek where a car somehow got off the road and hit the building, and we had to repair that building, but we also got the revenue from the insurance company. So those are the type of activities that will go through this fund as well. The unemployment reserve fund, I have budgeted for what we believe could be our unemployment expenditures this year, with the remaining balance being set aside for future years. The printing service fund, again, the only expenditure is to propose that we transfer that to the general fund to cover those printing expenses that are now in the general fund. And then, of course, the PERS reserve. I am proposing that all of those resources, all of that revenue that's going into this account is unappropriated to be reserved for future PERS reserves. And that would be something that certainly could be discussed, but with our budget as proposed, our current year PERS liabilities are covered. It is our future liabilities that are of great concern. So within that 600 series, our reserve funds, again, in these types of funds, you want to see reserves, right? You're talking about a reserve fund, you want to see things that are being able to be set aside. We are anticipating unemployment claims could be in the $330,000 range this next year. There is a lot of movement with different legislation on that, so that's very difficult to budget year to year. We anticipate potentially some losses and repairs, and then some interfund transfer. That is that print services fund balance that I'm proposing we transfer to zero out that fund. So I know I kind of ran through that, but that's yet another kind of a lot of pieces in that. So any questions on any of those?
I'm just really encouraged to see the forward thinking in a couple of those items that we haven't had in the past with the PERS reserve, and then also the capital improvement reserve, items we hadn't had in the past. And it's a really good and encouraging to see that we're not just working on 25, 26, but this is something that we're putting things away, dare I say, for a rainy day, because we know things are going to come. And it's just really encouraging to see that. So thanks for the efforts on those, especially those two items.
Honestly, that multi-year, as Superintendent Kellison alluded to, that multi-year forecast is going to be critical as, our resources have been a little slim in our office this year. I would love to be showing that to you right now. We have some projections for revenue for the 26-27 school year, and we are concerned, right? So we do want to be really as forward-thinking as we can be, having these plans. Between the capital reserve and that PERS reserve, that's $838,000 that could go on to an ending fund balance, and we could be sitting here jumping for joy saying we can get you $3.7 million ending fund balance. And You could, and that those are discussions, but we also know that there are very specific things that are very important to appropriate and to reserve for. So, you know, those transfers that we're proposing, they are expenditures, right, that are impacting truly what we call just an overall contingency and unappropriated balance. So,
And I did check with other superintendents, so I did a lot of research on that, and that is common best practice to do a PERS reserve like that, and as well as a capital improvement.
Well,
fund.
it's just, it's
Yeah.
smart than rather than worrying about it being unappropriated and having to touch it and budget for it next year when, like, what if you have a catastrophic failure in one of our aging buildings? Okay, you've got
HVAC.
500,000, not that you want to use it, but you've got at least it there to use it, God forbid something happens. That's just
Well, we
smart.
have 5 roofs that need to be
Yeah,
replaced.
exactly.
Well, yeah, we haven't been having any money going towards that, so it's good that we are now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It seems smart from my point of view, because when you have dedicated reserve funds, you know, previously you would just put it all in the ending fund balance and increase it. But then to everybody involved in the school district, that just looks like a rainy day fund. And everyone, it's always raining for wages, a project, something. Everybody wants to grab it, but when you want that thing, well, are you gonna take it from the PERS reserve? Now are you gonna take it from the PERS reserve fund or the capital, you know, various things, and it's, when it's a dedicated reserve, it's easier to keep people's well-intentioned hands off of it.
Yeah, and it helps, it also helps guide your long-range
Yes.
facilities group and what they do in the
Yes.
district, and how do you prioritize improvements and upgrades and changes over time. And so as we start, you know, having that committee convene again, I think it's important that they know that we are setting aside funds for those future projects that are important to the district, because maintaining a healthy environment for our students is super important. And we couldn't, there's nothing more paramount than that, than the health and wellness and safety of our kids. And, you know, I mean, we have an aging alarm in the high school that probably needs an upgrade at some point. And so, you know, like, how do we earmark things that are for capital improvements and make sure that we process those in a structured, prioritized way that protects the district? And I think that's really a thoughtful and important way to look at it. And, you know, I think that our whole team agrees that this is an important step forward to increasing our fiscal responsibility.
Nice, thank you.
Is it okay if I interject real quick?
Please.
So when I was on the long-range facilities, and we constantly heard about not having a deferred maintenance account. So to me, capital reserves is fantastic. So really well done from the admin, because it's also with the public, when we were going for a bond, they were extremely disappointed that they said we're managing our funds correctly to have reserves for deferred maintenance. So we took care of that, at least they're starting to. My other question, I guess, for you, Ms. Dowd, is paid leave Oregon, and I don't know where that goes in for our reserves or how we do that. I remember hearing a number about 15% of the staff was taking that, and then also that would lead to increased like sub costs. That's not going to be within the unemployment reserves? Where would we budget that money? Because I'm assuming that's going to probably increase another 3% with what I've been seeing on contracts.
perfect. That's an excellent question. So there is a shared tax burden for paid leave Oregon. 60% of the tax is borne by the employee, with 40% of that tax borne by the employer. Those costs, the employer costs, are within what I was referring to as the 200 objects, are associated payroll costs. So the employer cost for the tax itself is built into our budgeted, what we call our benefit costs. And then as far as the paid leave Oregon payments that the employer is receiving, those payments are being made by the company who administers the plan. So they're receiving all the tax revenue, and then they are in turn making the payment to the employee for the paid leave benefit. In regard to the substitutes, however, we have seen, and we continue to budget, we do have significant increased substitute or possibly temporary worker costs And that is an ongoing piece of this program. This program is critical to providing supports to people who need it, but it is extremely difficult in a industry such as ours, where let's use our classified support staff, for example. They have a 182-day contract, but paid leave Oregon gives them 60 days off. We have an employee who could be off 1/3 of their entire work contract for the year. And so there are disproportionate impacts, of course, not only on our costs, but the impact on the students, right? Because that movement and that change in especially some of our students who really thrive on consistency and structure, again, while a phenomenal program, it has really changed some of the climate in terms of how we can support our students.
Thank you, that's it.
Thank you. So with that, I would love to just jump on. I have not a whole lot to share on our 700 series. These are what we call our trust and charter school funds. Both of our charter schools, essentially, we do all of their accounting for them, all of their payroll, all of their bookkeeping, but we hold their money in essentially a trust within the 700 series. So each of our charter schools have their own fund. They have their own school boards who they present to their school board a proposed budget. Their board approves the budget. We enter it as their board approves it. The place that we will see charter school activity within our budget is as an expenditure within our general fund for their proportionate share of what we call the pass-through of their state school fund. We record all state school fund as revenue in the general fund. We record their share as an expense in the general fund, and then we record their share as revenue in the 700 funds. Again, I'm just reiterating this to explain why maybe an ending fund balance on total revenue, total budgeted revenue, may create some challenges as we continue to look at ending fund balance policies. So, but both of their budgets are in here. They both, within that 740 and 760 fund, they include their state school fund as well as certain grant revenues. But in light of our state direction, our charter school student investment account funds, which is a very significant grant, their funds run through their grant revenues must run through our Fund 251. So there's a little bit of complexity to that. That's part of our daily fun of trying to differentiate within one fund how much is theirs, how much is ours. And so fortunately, those beautiful 20-digit account numbers help us do that. So if you have any questions on the trust or charter funds, unfortunately, we cannot speak to their budgets because, again, those are by their own school boards and that sort of thing. So move on from that. So I'd like to, if there's no specific questions, kind of go over just a couple of quick slides for you so that I can pass the meeting off for your deliberation. I shared this with you last year and I wanted to do it again. I had a lot of people tell me this was really helpful about, what is the budget? We must remember your budget is a plan, it is an estimate, and it is a guide. It's our comprehensive financial plan for this one fiscal year. As we've talked about tonight though, it's not built with just 1 year in mind. It is built thinking way ahead. It is an estimate. It's estimating the ending fund balance for this year. It's estimating revenues for next year. It's estimating expenditures. Those are all going to change tomorrow. They changed actually after I released this on Friday. I mean, all of those numbers, right? They were estimates at that time. But the most important piece to me, that we treat this as a guide. We actively monitor it. We ensure we're looking at expenditure compliance within those appropriation authorities, and we make operational adjustments. We must adjust as our budget is going to adjust, our revenues are going to adjust. We must adjust to that budget and not shelve this and put it away and go with that. The roles here tonight, your administration here, we are presenting the proposed budget. And we are then serving in an advisory capacity here to help answer questions, as we've done throughout the session to try to help break this down a little bit for you. Our budget committee's role is to approve the appropriations and the tax rates that we are proposing for you. And just to be clear again, your appropriations are within those fund families, and you are providing authorization to spend certain amounts in instruction, in support services, in community services, in capital, debt service, and then contingency and reserves. Tonight, committee's options in front of you, it can be approved as proposed. The budget committee can choose to increase the appropriation and tell us that we believe there will be more money than what you're presenting. We can decrease appropriations. We can say we believe there will be less money than what is being presented. Or discuss realignment if you believe that this budget does not reflect the vision and the strategic plan of this district. After an approval happens, the budget and tax rate approvals will go to the board for adoption. That is currently scheduled for our budget hearing on June 9th. And after adoption, again, those budget adjustments will continue.
Hey, Kim, before you get.
Yes.
Why, so you're on your conclusion, but I just wanted to remind you about the high-cost disability question that Josh had.
Thank you, Josh.
See, that's Debbie, it's all Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie.
So here's my question on this one, Kim, before we get too far. This is actually, the only real question I have about this budget is this one. We know we only got $38, I think, from our budgeted at $680,000 this last year. And I'm really concerned that we're budgeting 710, an increase, knowing from everything we heard, we're not going to get it. And I know that I think it might be a strategy, because I know that that's actually not even close to probably the amount of funds we need, or it's probably trying to get it right on the nose. But the state's not going to pay us that. It reminds me of our ESSER funds when we were anticipating funds that we know aren't going to come in. And I just don't like those big, like food service and this, the big minus 300, the big minus 600 when we're budgeting. And what's your thoughts on that?
I am pulling up my calculation projection right now, and I am going to tell you exactly where that came from. So the legislature has a plan to increase the high-cost disability funding for the starting July 1 of 2025. So for this next biennium, they are proposing adding $200 million to the biennium. So we have received guidance from the Oregon Department of Education. They suggested we should budget 63 to 68 cents reimbursement on the dollar. Brandon and his team have done a projection based on some estimates on what we may spend on our high-cost disability students in 2025-26. With ODE telling us to anticipate 63 to 68 cent return on the dollar, I took that and dropped it to 60. And I have budgeted revenue for next year of 60 cents on the dollar of our projected costs. I also included, and so that number came to 960,000 roughly. However, I'm still very concerned about this final year of the current funding stream, and while you all know that we took what we were potentially going to receive and we reduced it drastically, I am still concerned that if we see another 40% jump statewide in what people's actual costs are to serve high-cost disability students, we may end up paying back, I don't think it'll be this high, but let's say we have to pay back $250,000 next year. My $960,000 projection for next year's grant minus potential $250,000 payback, I think that's possibly way high, is where I came up with the $710,000.
You answered that so well, Kim. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Makes sense to me.
Oh, sorry.
I just don't trust the state to pay us because they haven't. So, I mean.
I believe this could be an area in where revenue comes in above budget. I don't believe our payback will be quite $250,000. We only received $480,000-ish, I believe, this year. I don't believe we're going to have to pay back $250,000, but our heartburn over this grant has been very hefty, and so I feel like a conservative approach on this was prudent, and looking forward to moving forward with a little better reimbursement. Again, as we've talked, there are some structural concerns with how that grant is initially dispersed and then reconciled. But I do believe that this is, I believe this is hopefully a safe projection. I will be very sad if this is not, if that significant of a basically conservative approach is not enough. That would be
You
devastating.
did a great job, Kim, and throughout this whole presentation tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
That's not just conservative, that's uber conservative. That's like well below
I would
a
love for you
conservative
guys
number.
to, get 200,000 more than I budgeted. Yep, sorry, I was off. But hey, it's revenue.
Yeah. Thanks for being off. Yeah, if that's the truth in the future, we don't get hit with a 250. That'd be great.
Thank you for the reminder on that. So with that, in conclusion, we just want to reiterate this proposed budget is aligned with the priorities that have been identified in our superintendent budget message tonight, those that our school board have proposed to us and communicated with us over the past year. The budget development has been a multi-month process involving leadership teams throughout the district, throughout the organization, throughout our community, and regional and state partners. Honestly, this budget year more than ever, I think all of our business managers have been saying, what are you doing for that? What are you doing for that? Oh wait, pivot, we got the president's message literally a week and a half ago. The president's budget came out, pivot, time again. So, we really wish the document had been out maybe a little bit earlier for you, but with the president's budget coming out, I think it was the Thursday before we released this, we all of a sudden, time out, let's do this a little differently. So I want to just open this up to what questions what questions do you guys have, and what can we do to help you feel comfortable with the information proposed?
I don't have any additional questions. I think the thoughtfulness of going through the explanation tonight, I think Aaron and others have mentioned just the foresight of like specifically planning, almost kind of like you teach our kids like the envelope style, like, hey, you got to budget this, put a little money in it. And I appreciate the thoughtfulness, and then also just the recognition of where we've been. So great explanation, and I personally don't need anything more.
Yeah, I think it's just dovetailing in that it's doing so many of the things that haven't been done for a while, as far as getting things to capital improvements and these sorts of things which we should be doing, should have been done, should be doing. And so good to see it, and fantastic explanations for those of us that don't live and die with numbers. I don't know why anybody would do that, but appreciate that too, to make it all clear, and all the hard work that all the leadership has taken as far as figuring out what we needed and where we needed it. And Kim, you putting the whole package together for us, and so I think all the discussion we've had tonight is taking care of any questions I had.
And I'll just commend the efforts again, and Kim and everybody in the staff getting this together. I've had the pleasure of, whether as a board member or as a community member, being part of, I think this is my 10th budget committee. And I don't remember one that's been this easy to understand, and coming out of a, dare I say, budget crisis, right? Being able to understand from the level that we as a budget committee need to understand the numbers. Yes, we get in the weeds, we pull out little things, but it's not our job to get in and nitpick every single line item, right? We have to understand from a broad perspective view and the why behind, okay, this expenditure, this revenue is supported by this expenditure, and vice versa. I don't think I've seen as clear an explanation on that as I've seen tonight. So I just want to commend your guys' efforts for making this very easy for us to understand who don't live in the world that you do, Kim, and I commend you for your your amazing God-given ability to bring this down to our level and communicate this out for everybody to understand. So thank you.
I'd like to commend the years and years of education and experience that you put in and all of your teachers put in to teaching you all of that, because I know that was a lot. I came armed with all my highlighters, and you hit every question I had. So thank you. I got nothing. Great job.
Thank you for that feedback, because my goal is to address what jumps out, right?
Yeah.
We should already know every question that's going to be asked of us. Now, there may be times that I may need to look into that and get back to you, but this document is prepared knowing that there is an anomaly here, there is an anomaly here, and we are going to make sure that that is addressed in full transparency. That has been a huge, goal of this leadership team and
Collective.
And absolutely.
I have to second that. I have 2 pages of questions here, and you checked off virtually all of them, so I don't have to ask the questions. And I'm also one of those that lives and dies by the numbers. I just finished my budget for my federal and state and local funds last week, my 37th budget, because I've been doing this that many years. And this is the best budget presentation I've ever heard. Don't tell my finance department that. But it really is.
Yeah, good job, Kim. That's amazing. I have a couple of questions on my list, most of which were addressed, like everyone else has said. But are there curriculum areas that we're not in compliance still that have been built into the budget to try to get into compliance?
Yeah, so I think there's one area that I still have concern about, which is health, which is high school health. So the K-5 region, ODE has really good free resources and free support, so you can utilize their system for the K-5 part of it. And we have some money budgeted in the budget for curriculum, but the high school stuff is super expensive. There's only one provider, and so we can delay it 1 year. It's allowable in ODE's system. It means that on the Division 22 standards, we have to say that we delayed our adoption. I would say that we adopt the K-5 products and work with teachers to get those on board in the elementary schools, and then work towards next year for the health. Yeah, that's an area that's going to continue to be challenging for us, and that may be an area where we want to, when we do our strategic planning, Kelly, maybe carve out some of the student investment account to cover that. So we have a lot of staff in the student investment account currently. There's about 30, was it 34, Kim? FTE in that system. But we might, as we re-explore our priorities, we might find that we prioritize that a little more. That would probably be a good idea. We're trying to kind of, piecemeal it together. We just want to have a really strong ending fund balance, and those books are I think they were
high 300.
It was over 300,000 for the K-12 adoption. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's really high. So it didn't make the cut right now, but the K-5 we can take care of.
Wow, that's a lot. This is very in the weeds, but I'm curious and I wrote it down, so I'll ask. On the transportation, it must have been a board work session or something a couple of meetings ago, there was talk about needing to potentially make some changes to either add a bus route or make some changes, et cetera. So is that, I realize that that dollar amount in the scheme of this is not gigantic maybe, but.
So this proposed budget does not include an additional route.
The additional routes between $65,000 and $70,000. And we do have a parent meeting scheduled. Melissa's working on getting that together so that we can talk to parents, and we've got a packet that's going out to them to kind of, alert them and see what kind of, pushback and challenges parents have with that. So we're working on that. But I mean, it's not one that ODE will reimburse because it's within that 1 mile corridor. Yeah.
I think most of my other questions were answered. One thing I was going to ask that I just want to tell you I was going to ask is how this budget addresses some of the feedback that was received from the community and that Start, Stop, Keep work session that you did. And also I wanted to ask, you know, like what's something that we can share with the community that's like a hopeful piece of information about where we're headed. But it's like super obvious to me that the you know, what several people already said, I won't reiterate about the capital fund reserve, and I can just see, I have had my notes from that Start, Stop, Keep, and several of those things have been addressed, even though the budget is not overflowing with money. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
If I can add, there's, you know, as I mentioned before, underlying all these budget projections are operational procedures that we're doing. And when Kim and I came on board, you know, our first task was really to kind of analyze how we got to where we're at. And I know the charge I was given was do what I need to do to make sure as we're working through this to minimize the chance we get back into a situation like that. So, you know, there's several areas that I think in each of these departments that we've done to do that. And I can speak on staffing because it's the greatest, the largest of your expenditures. In the past, where staffing was done what I would call more on an individual level, historical level, meaning I have this many people this year, enough people tell me I need another person. Well, if I'm always thinking from that perspective, that's how you see that chart where we ended up with enrollments going down, and I always call it an alligator chart. Enrollments go down, but your staffing goes up, right? What we're doing this year, for instance, and I reiterated it with principals today, because after you are okay with this, I will start doing more in detailed staffing with the schools. And I've had to remind them a few times that we're going to do it a little bit differently this year, and that I and my personnel specialists will go to each school. The first thing we're going to ask is, let's review your staff from this year, including how's their performance been, and what do we see are their developmental trends, you know, and what we can do with them. Then the second question becomes is, let's actually pull out all your projections and think about where they will end up next year, because that'll allow me to think from a district perspective, how many third grade teachers do I need? How many science teachers do I need? And it's only then when we do that and I get a picture of it from the overall district, then we'll talk about the actual people that go into slot those positions. Some people will see that as a little bit draconian because we do live in a world of people, right?
Yeah.
But where we're at today, this is kind of developing a way to make sure that we're thinking about all those factors that are going into staffing. And my experience has been in doing this I'm just telling this stuff the other day that my first time doing staffing was 2001 in Beaverton School District. So I kind of gained some experience in doing this through a few downturns in the economy. And I will say that what I have found is, even though it may look on the surface that we're looking at it strictly from numbers and not necessarily thinking of the people, experience tells me that when you go through this process, actually you have a fairer process for people.
Yeah,
because you're able to take a complete picture of everybody, where they're licensed, what their skills are.
Yeah.
And then, because a lot of people want to transfer, right? And before we think about, well, let's take this person over here and that, we first analyze what are our needs. And I think in the long run, that can help us with that. I want to get that alligator's mouth closed, right? And I think that's one step. But I'm just speaking from my perspective and doing staffing. I know that each of the directors and the principals too, in a lot of respect, I mean, they're doing this analysis at their own level as well.
Yeah, we directed the high school staff to really look at their master schedule and find where it was inefficient. And so I spent a lot of time with them and looking at those things and how can we maximize the sections that teachers teach, and how do we make sure that our staffing is equitable? Like, do they have similar student loads? Do they have similar amounts of periods that they teach? Like, is the schedule level? Like you have to level it by department in such a large building, and so that's really that's a mathematical formulaic way to look at staffing. And that's the same thing Tony's talking about. So when when you're looking at it from a student-centered perspective, like how many teachers do we need to serve this amount of students, and what programs are we gonna offer, and you know, do we have versatile staff members that can teach, you know, a plenitude of different things, and how does that help us in our flexibility? And Creighton does this too. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. But if your master schedule's inefficient, then your FTE is inefficient, and then it doesn't serve students well. So really, like, we spent hours and hours and hours looking at that. And that is the level of dedication that we gave to the budget this year, because that saved us from hiring FTE that was unnecessary. So we saved money in a multitude of ways that we haven't even talked about in here tonight. And so I just want you to know that the creativity and the passion and the drive to make this what it is was exceptional from this team. And so I just want to commend everybody here tonight for their work. It was amazing.
One question or thing that Kelly brought up too was about what in the start kind of meeting we had on the community feedback, which was excellent. And how it ties into what you just said about staffing at the high school. It kind of jogged my memory. One of the pieces of feedback was, especially from our students that were in attendance, was about bringing back block scheduling at the high school. And we know that's a costly line item.
Yeah.
Could you just remind maybe us and myself, like, what the cost would be if we did want to go back to block scheduling, which I think is more beneficial for our students ultimately? How much would that increase the line? I mean, we would need, I can't remember the number, how many FTE we would need.
Yeah, Patrick estimated it's roughly on the low end 6 FTE and then upwards of 8 perhaps. And the other thing that it does is that it negates the ability, I mean, it would mean the middle school has to be on that schedule too if they have any teachers that teach in both buildings.
That's
so
right.
they have, you know, choir teachers and music and other things in common.
That's right.
Where the kids flow back and forth.
Because we got some going back and forth now.
Yeah.
That's right.
So it is an expensive endeavor to go back to a block system. Now, could we look at it again and see, you know, after we maximize the efficiency we have and see if we can get it, could we get it down to 3 teachers? Can we get it down to 4? Like, what is the very bottom we can do by tweaking and messing with the schedule? I mean, it's probably a 2-week-long process with 4 people doing it so that you can have multiple eyes on it. Because if you look at it too long, pretty soon everything looks the same.
Yeah, it's
Kim
crazy.
probably knows that really well right now.
Thanks.
I want to tack on, though, what Superintendent Kellison said, is that, you know, this process has been absolutely a team approach. Every one of our principals, our department leaders and that, but, you know, our board has been extremely supportive, but Superintendent Kellison has done a great job of really identifying new things to look at, you know, and look at things different ways, and the skills that Tony has brought to us, and just, I really have appreciated the new lens, and it caught me off guard a couple times. Like, oh, you want to be involved in that? Sorry, I'm sorry. It has. I just want to extend the thanks to everyone in this district, in this community, our school board, our principals, everybody makes this happen together. So I just want to make it clear, this is no one can do this alone, for sure.
No, and the entire staff, in an effort to really save funds. I mean, they took that very seriously, and they were instrumental in doing that work.
I can share that most of our schools, they receive a discretionary budget, so they receive X amount of dollars, and they determine where they want to prioritize that within their schools. Many of our schools have spent less than 50% of that this year.
Wow.
And that is contributing to those expenditures being under budget, like you've seen, and that is huge. Now, some have different needs. Obviously, our middle school and our high school costs are more. They have some club advisors in there. They have things that have some pretty fixed costs. They are related to salaries. As benefits go up, unfortunately, that disproportionately impacts our schools that have maybe some payroll costs in there. But absolutely across the board, everyone has.
And the referees were really expensive this year. So where we saw like people kind of max out, they had some heavy referee costs. So.
Okay. Does anybody's
permission, can we move on to number 6 on the agenda?
I believe you can.
Okay, perfect.
I think, are you there, Kim?
Yep, I have
Okay.
concluded my.
Okay, terrific. Is there any supplemental financial information to be presented?
This presentation will be listed under that item.
Okay.
This will be the supplemental as well as, and we'll make sure the superintendent's budget message gets posted as well, and it'll all become part of the official documentation.
Terrific. Okay, that moves us to number 7 on the agenda, which is public comment. This is my script? Okay, yeah, terrific. So, Silver Falls School District Budget Committee encourages public comment in order to make better informed decisions. To expedite public comment and make judicious use of time, the following practices are strongly encouraged. Contact the district superintendent at least 1 week prior to the meeting and ask to be placed on the agenda. Give the superintendent as much detail as possible about your comments, including written information, so that the background information can be developed for Budget Committee consideration prior to the meeting. The Silver Falls School District Budget Committee has established the following guidelines to accommodate public testimony. Obtain recognition from the chair before speaking. Give testimony from the designated place. Keep comments concise and avoid repetition. Be specific about what it is you want the Budget Committee to do. You are encouraged to provide each Budget Committee member with written copies of your testimony. In order to accommodate all who want to speak, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. And groups appearing on the same topic are asked to designate a primary speaker and may be granted 5 minutes. If you'd like to speak during public comment and are attending virtually, you may use the raise hand feature of your Zoom. If you are attending in person, please approach the public comment table located in front of the board. Do we have any public comments for this evening, either in person or virtually?
We have Daniel Vasquez monitoring the online system, and I don't see any notification of anyone online on that.
Okay. Number 8 on the agenda is available for questions and discussions, if there is any more of that for this evening. Okay. All right. Number 9 on the agenda is approval of the budget and tax rates and decision to proceed with the second budget committee meeting. As a general rule of thumb, at 9:30 p.m. I forget Robert's Rules of Order. So, is there a specific thing I'm supposed to say other than I propose a motion to approve the budget and tax rates?
Since I got a cheat sheet here, I'll make the motion.
Please do. Thank you.
I move that the Budget Committee of Silver Falls School District approve the 2025-26 fiscal year budget at $83,854,144 and set next year's tax levy rate at the permanent rate of $4 and 5458. I'm not going to try to go and read that. per $1,000 of assessed value, and approve a tax levy of $4,681,222 for the purpose of retiring bond debt of the district.
Second.
You want to read that back?
I would love to.
Just, I use B.
Okay. So, the motion then needs to be seconded by another budget committee member who's done.
Derek.
Then there's a discussion on the motion. When that is, I'm not reading my script. I'm reading the notes for the script. Okay, my apologies.
You're doing
So
fine.
so you just did, okay.
Repeat the motion.
I move that the Budget Committee of the Silver Falls School District approve the 2025-2026 fiscal year budget at $83,854,144 and set next year's tax levy at the permanent rate of $4.5458 per 1,000 of assessed value, and approve the tax levy at $4,681,222 for the purpose of retiring bonded debt of the district. Is there a motion to approve? And I call for a vote. Yes.
Yes.
Creighton,
Yes.
Maxwell,
Yes.
Ginny,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Phil,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
Derek,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
all in favor.
Okay. So moved. Number 10 on the agenda is additional discussion or other business for future agenda items.
May I just verify that
Please do.
Director Von Flew seconded the motion?
Yes.
Okay. Last call for any discussion items. That brings us to item 11 on the agenda, which is to adjourn. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. All right. Thank you.